Good morning, good morning. Nice to be here. Just give me 2 seconds. I'll get set up. Before we start, I'd like to say a quick prayer, if that's okay. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for a day a week we get to take off from some of the struggles of the world and come here and be with family and friends and talk about you, learn about you, want to be more like you. Bless us today in your name. Amen. Sermon today. I know if some of you had seen the title of the sermon, The Loving Outlaw, you're probably scratching your heads wondering who could he possibly be talking about. Well, I mean, so to speak, I guess the writing was on the wall. But seriously, we're here for one reason. It's the reason we rock up to church every single week, isn't it? We come here because we want to talk about Jesus. And if he was here today, how would he start off a sermon? That's how I thought to myself this week. I said, how would Jesus actually get up if he walked into Springwood today and stand up and preach? He would probably give you a welcome. Obviously, he would probably preach the whole sermon in Hebrew, which my fluency is a little bit down on Hebrew. But he would welcome you, Bruhim Habaim Shalom Aleichem, which simply means welcome and peace be with you. It would be a general welcome. For us at Springwood Church, we would like to say guest or somebody who's not welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to welcome anyone here who smokes, even the vegetarians. Welcome to them as well. Welcome to the younger, the older. And I promised Reg before the church service started I was not going to pick on him today. So Reg, I'm leaving you out of this. But welcome to the younger and to the older, the wrinkled and those with Botox. And don't let my extremely youthful appearance fool you. I am older than what I look. And welcome to those who have never been to church and to those who have sat in the same seat since the church was built. To those who love sport, to those who work on street corners. Welcome to those who are Muslim. Welcome if you're from Hillsong or you're from a Catholic church. Married, single, divorced, living together, co-parenting, single parenting. Those who want kids and don't have them. Those who have kids and don't want them. Not me. Welcome. Because when you think about how many different types of humans there are on the face of the earth, especially in this day and age where so much is spoken about preferences, binary, whatever it might be, the question I kept coming back to would, who would Jesus welcome into his church on a Sabbath morning? And it was every single person who wanted to walk through those doors. There would not be a single person that Jesus would stand up the front and say, you don't belong here. And you would have seen some of the signs outside that say it, and we truly mean it. You belong here because this is where Jesus, we believe, is. He is here with us. Why is this so important? Well, because the one thing I want to talk about today is the loving outlaw. How much did he actually love? And when I say he loved everyone, I could pretty much just finish the sermon there, but for those who know me, know that's probably unlikely to happen. The Jewish people had a preconceived idea of who Jesus was. Anyone here willing to throw out some words that the Jewish people might have had for who they thought the Messiah was going to be? What was he going to be like? When the Messiah came to earth, what was the Jewish Messiah going to be like? What are some of the traits they were looking for? Sorry? A conqueror, absolutely. What else were they looking for? A king, a leader. All these different things is exactly what they were looking for. If they'd been living in the US, and I picked the US because it's an easy target for me, but if they were living in the US at that time and they were looking for their king to come along, where would he have come from? You know, if you were based in the US and that's where the Jewish nation was at the time, you would expect that Jesus was going to be born into a family, maybe from Washington, D.C., or maybe New York, a really powerful city, a place where leaders are born and bred. He would probably be wealthy, maybe even a little flashy with his money as well, because you want this leader, this king, to be revered and admired. You want this person to be strong. He would probably be pro-gun, being in the US. He would lead people with an iron fist, and he would destroy anyone who stood in their way as a nation. It wouldn't matter if you had differing religious opinions or political opinions or different lifestyles. He would crush you for the benefit of the nation of Israel. That's the kind of person they were looking for to come down and lead them out of the oppression they'd been under with the Romans. But that wasn't Jesus. Actually, that kind of person sounds more like a US president than Jesus. Instead, Jesus would have... Can I have the clicker? I just remembered I've got slides. Is that working late? No, not yet. Yes, it's working. Cool, thank you. Yes, it's on Aladdin. Yes. Excuse me 1 second. Just trying to... There, okay. Can we go back to there? Okay, there we go. Who's ever seen this shirt, symbol, sign? It's quite famous, straight out of Compton. What's so famous about Compton? What do you know about it? Crime. Yes, absolutely. One of the highest places of crime in the US. Some very famous people have come out of there. You know, the Dr. Dre's of the world and people who... And Reg, I'm not picking on you, but you just wouldn't have heard about them. But these people came out of Compton, and it was a violent place. And I think the Jesus of my fake America would have come from somewhere like this. He would have been born into a rough and tough place. And people would have seen his mum as this single, unmarried woman who couldn't even explain where he came from and who the father was. His dad would have been a hard worker. He would have been doing something in Compton. He might have been a mechanic with just grease under his fingernails. He would have worked so hard just to try and make ends meet for his family now, for a son who wasn't even his, and he worked tirelessly for it. It was a respectable job, but it was a tough one. And Jesus eventually would go and take over that family business one day and follow in his dad's footsteps and become that mechanic. But why did God choose Compton rather than Hollywood, rather than Washington? Why a mechanic and not a senator? Why not at least be adopted by Angelina? Instead, God specifically chose a Compton. People would look at him, would look at Jesus and say, how could this man be the savior of humanity? We as Christians don't make this stuff up, do we? I mean, it's not a really good marketing spiel for us to say the leader of our religion happened to come from the worst of the worst and all these different traits. We, like the Jewish people, would love to just stand up and say, he is the king and almighty and just all power and conquering and when he was here on earth. But God did not want that for us. We would be a church who would love to have Jesus as a cross between Superman and Thor. You know, Chris Hemsworth look, except obviously Middle Eastern. You know, the strength of Superman who can just do everything and fly around the world and fix all of our problems. And we could lie there under a car that's crushing us because it's crashed on top of us, and we would just go, please save me, and all of a sudden a flash would come before us, and there's Jesus just holding up the car, And yet, he didn't come like that to earth. And there's not many other religions out there that I know of where their God spent their entire life trying to almost be the lowest in society. The outlaw part of it. What made Jesus an outlaw? How many people here have ever called your in-laws an outlaw? I have, many times. What do you think of when we use the term outlaw? Yes, Carol, not you, obviously Peter. Sorry, I thought that was glaringly obvious when I said it. What are some of the traits you would think of when you think of outlaw? Sorry? Ned Kelly, absolutely. There were only two that I came up with as well that instantly came to me. One, outlaw motorbike gang. Probably looking at me, you wouldn't believe that I'd been a member of that gang. I hadn't. But it's a gang you've heard of a lot. And what's a trait that you often associate with something like an outlaw motorbike gang? What are some of the traits you would associate? Come on, what do you know about motorbike gangs? Surely you've heard about them. Sorry? Wow. Yep. Look, that was all planned. I told Dan to say that. No, I didn't. Drug trafficking, violence. Sorry? Drug dealers, racketeering, and almost all the things you will come across other than the martyr run are going to be negative in connotations when you look at an outlaw motorbike gang. And as Mladen said before, another thought you may have when you hear outlaw straight away is one of the most famous outlaws we've ever had in the country, Ned Kelly. Now, again, over time, Ned's, the persona about Ned has gotten so much better. We don't see him as a really horrible criminal anymore. He's an Aussie icon. This guy's a legend in Australia, and yet all he did was break the law on purpose. He robbed and killed and slaughtered and did everything else like that, and we look at him and go, what a legend. But most of the time when you hear the word outlaw, it is negative. It's not often you think, good person, great job. The first time in Mark where Jesus, if you've got Bibles today, please open them. We're going to use them a little bit. If you don't have a Bible and you're not embarrassed, you can put your hand up and somebody can bring you a Bible. Also, any of these Bibles you get brought, you can keep them. We're going to look at Mark 2, 5 to 6. A man had been lowered down because he and his friends knew that Jesus could heal him. It wasn't just because he couldn't walk, because remember, in society of the day, what did having a disability or a crippling health issue mean? Why did you have a disability back in those times? Sin. You had been cursed. God had struck you down with this illness or disease because you had obviously done something so wrong, or your parents had, or your grandparents, or work your way back as far as you want to. So it wasn't just that this man couldn't walk. He couldn't get a job, which is why you hear about all of these people, the crippled people, as the Bible would call them, sitting around pools begging for money. It wouldn't have been easy to find friends, because who wants to associate themselves with somebody who has done something so bad that God has struck them down? Why do you want to be seen with that person if they've done something so wrong? Because all of these other friends know they're not perfect. You guys know you're not perfect. And yet when they looked at somebody with that kind of disability, they went, wow, I know what I've done. I'm not disabled. So that person must have done something really bad. And all he wanted to do was be lowered down, to be near Jesus, to be in his presence, because he knew Jesus could save him. He knew. A few verses later in Mark 2:16, and this is where the Pharisees came into it. Mark 2:16 and 17. Some of the teachers, the Pharisees, they saw that Jesus, just after this, was eating with who? Anyone like to read that out? 2:16 and 17. Who was Jesus eating with? Sorry? Tax collectors. Anyone here work for the ATO and are willing to put their hand up? We all, yes. Yes, we all do. Yes. So I've been, for the last couple of weeks of my life, as my family will attest, been having the fun of a pending audit from the ATO. This is not a fun thing when you've got a business, looking at being audited every single transaction you've ever made, every work trip that I've ever made. Stop laughing. It's a tough thing. But back in those days, not only were the tax collectors coming after you for the money you actually did owe, they were lining their own pockets and were some of the wealthiest people in society. And people knew they weren't wealthy because of their wage. People knew they were wealthy because they were taking some on the side, and what could anyone do about it? Were you going to run to the Romans and go, hey, I'm a little Jewish guy over here, and this tax collector who could also be Jewish, he's ripping me off. The Romans don't care. As long as they got their money, they didn't care what else happened. And the teachers and Pharisees are saying, why is he eating with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus heard them and he turned around and he answered them and he said, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. I didn't come to invite the good to be my followers. I came to invite the sinners. We're getting a picture of this man who is so anti everything the Jewish nation had hoped he would be. And how quickly this man broke some of their rules and became an outlaw, because by Mark 3, the very next chapter, we have 1-6, the Pharisees now wanting him dead. Literally within that space of time, with the disciples writing these books here, by Mark 3, they are wanting him dead. The next time Jesus went into a meeting place, a man with a crippled hand was there. A Pharisee wanted to accuse Jesus of doing something wrong, so they set him up. They sat back and watched from behind the scenes going, I really hope that Jesus heals them. Jesus told the man to stand up. He said, stand up where everyone could see him. And he said, on the Sabbath day, should we do good deeds or evil deeds? Should we save somebody's life or should we destroy it? And no one said a word. And I love this bit. Verse 5, Jesus was angry. Angry. As he looked around the people, yet he also felt sorry for them because they were so stubborn. And he told the man, stretch out your hand, and he did, and his hand was healed. The Pharisees left and straight away started making plans with Herod's followers to kill him. Picture Jesus standing there angry. The ruler of the universe is angry because the laws he'd put in place so long ago for Sabbath even were being so construed now, or misconstrued in a way that upset him so much that he couldn't even heal a sick person on the Sabbath without it breaking the law and him becoming an outlaw. He was an outlaw because he put people and love above man-made laws. Anyone know who that is? Yes. No. Yes. Still no. You forgot. Okay. Anne Frank. Very good. A lot of people here would have heard of Anne and her book. It's a very, very famous book. But it's not Anne that really did much. She wrote a diary about her experiences. But meet Geese, the woman who actually took in Anne's father, who was the business owner. And Meep actually worked for him. And when the Nazis came in, it was Meep who actually, not a Jew herself, obviously, stood up and said, I will protect you. And she ended up breaking the law of Germany at the time, day in and day out, to protect these people. She was an outlaw as far as Germany was concerned. And the Nazis, if they'd found out that she was the one who was actually hiding these Jews in the attic there of that business, she would have been taken as well. And Jesus was so similar. He had no issue breaking the rules when it came to saving human life. He healed on the Sabbath. He ate with criminals and those that society rejected. He wasn't even a priest. He called himself God, or at least he didn't stop others from calling him God. He threw tables in the temple. He told the leaders their prayers were too long, their egos were too massive, and that they only gave offering to show off. They were no better, he said to them, than the woman who was caught in adultery, and none of them threw that stone. They hated him with hatred I don't think many of us understand. But Jesus never broke a Jewish law for his own gain. How do we know he was a loving outlaw? You could list off dozens of stories that would show that, but I just want to look at one. You could look at lepers, the child who died, Lazarus, Peter on the water, Samaritan woman at the well, feeding of the 5,000+, all these different things he did to help others around him. But we're going to look at one, a story that comes from Mark 5. And this is a story within another story. So the outer story is when Darius, this guy who is a Jewish leader, comes to Jesus' feet and kneels in front of him and begs for his daughter's life, who is so deadly sick at home, that it's imminent that she will die. And as you know the story, during this whole story, she does actually pass away. But within this, Jesus starts heading across to his house to try and help this sick child. And one of my absolute favorite stories of the Bible happens in this little section. Jesus is walking in this crowd. He is walking and the noise is overwhelming. There are hundreds, thousands of people. Everywhere he went, he was a rock star to the lowest in society. They just followed and swarmed around him. You can imagine the crowd as it was building. All these people were coming along. There was noise, there was shouting, there were people talking, going, imagine what he's going to do. What's he going to do when he gets there? And then he turns around and he says, who touched me? The disciples look at him and go, yo, Jesus, hey, you know, we're friends and all, but you've gone a little, as my daughter would do to me, crazy. Actually, she goes, you drive me crazy. These guys are looking at Jesus going, who touched you? Are you serious? There's literally 100 people we could list off who's touched you in the last 30 seconds, trying desperately to be near you. And he turns around and he says, who touched me? Now remember the context of this story. I'm going to talk on a subject I'm extremely well versed in, a female monthly cycle, something I'm really comfortable talking about. But I suspect that if I said here, show of hands, who likes the menstrual cycle in this world, I probably wouldn't get too many hands go up from either men or women. And back then, you've got to remember the context of this story, because a woman who was going through that cycle in a month could do what? What couldn't she do? Sorry? She couldn't go out in public. You couldn't go to the temple and worship. You could not touch a male. Could not touch a male. If you touched a male, you would make the male unclean, and he would be excluded from society for the next 7 days as well. She couldn't go down to the marketplace and buy food for the family. She couldn't go to the well and draw water for her family. I actually, last night, I kid you not, I read a book on this subject. And the woman who wrote it was writing that for a lot of women back then, this period of their life every month was actually a blessing and given as a gift. Because for 1 week a month, they got time to themselves. I was blown away. I'd never seen it like this before. But she said, historically, women at this particular time in their lives would look forward to it because they didn't have to wait on their husband, the kids. They didn't have to go shopping, draw the water, do anything, no cooking. They couldn't do anything except sit back and wait for it to pass. The difference was she had had this for 600 straight weeks. See how much your life would be affected right now if you walked out of church today and found out you were not allowed to cook, clean, go near anyone, touch anyone, be near your children, go shopping, do anything. You want to know how debilitating this was for her? She literally stayed by herself for 600 weeks in a row without any other interaction. She never got to the end of that week where they would go down to the pool that was set aside for them to cleanse, and then they could enter society again. She kept waiting for that day to come, and it never came. She couldn't even worship in the temple. 12 years. Remember, don't even get started on the logistics of it. She didn't have a supermarket she'd just go down and buy some female hygiene products. This is 600 weeks of bleeding. And then she touched Jesus. Instant, it says. Instant. And Jesus even turns around and says, "Who touched me?" Because why? He felt power leave his body. Who touched me? He wasn't going to get her into trouble. And you look at the strength of this woman. She didn't run away. She instantly knew she'd been cleansed. Instantly, it says she knew it. Instead of running away going, "I've just touched a man, which has made him unclean, which then he's touched all these other people, they're all unclean. I've just caused an absolute calamity." Jesus says, "Who was it?" And she puts her hand up feebly, almost shamefully, and goes over and lays at his feet and tells him the story. Not privately. Tells the story to the hundreds or thousands of people standing around, traveling to Jairus' house to find out what miracle God's going to perform. And how do we know she had an influence? Because only another chapter later, it says people from other villages after that would simply come near Jesus just to touch his robe. The story had spread so quickly. That's the kind of Jesus that we serve. You know, that powerful being who had so much compassion and care. He turned around to that woman and he said, "Your faith has healed you." And then the last story for me, Passover. Passover came, and as you know, it's one of the most special days, or actually times or periods of time on the Jewish calendar, where at the Passover, people would, I'll just skip through this here. Actually, I'll go back to one bit that I forgot to mention. The word Jesus used, depending on your translation, but the original Greek, the word that Jesus used there to tell the woman that she had been healed was daughter. This was so significant in their time because it instantly deemed her as family and as somebody who'd been accepted again back into society. So when Jesus said daughter to her, instantly all those people around her knew that she was now part and parcel and accepted into their community. They hadn't organised a room for Passover. They were all out of their heads. I mean, can you imagine literally being followed around like paparazzi trailing you all the time? I mean, I know what it's like, and it's tough. All these people, thousands, just flocking after them all day, every day. And the disciples are just so over it themselves. These 12 guys are just mentally and physically exhausted from the travel, the walking, the people. and they'd forgotten to organize a Passover room, a really bad thing to do. Jesus performed a miracle. He said, go in there, you'll find a man, he'll find you a room. And they got one. The book of John talks about this, but all the Gospels do. But the disciples are hungry. They're absolutely exhausted, as I said. They've been through so much. Constant threats coming from the Pharisees on top of everything else. They get to this room, and we're not told specifics about it, but we don't even know if, because they'd booked it on the day of Passover, whether or not there were even servants there to take their coats, to clean their feet, do all the other things that would normally happen. They sit down. And we get to communion. Why is it so important? Think of what the streets would have been like in Jesus' time. When you've got up and down these streets, horses, cattle, many other livestock or animals walking up and down, people, there was no real working sewage system around the place as well. And they get into a room very similar to this. This, the most famous painting. The difference being is, in Jesus' time, there were no tables like that. They wouldn't have sat up on chairs. They would have been sitting on the floor, sitting there about to eat off a very low table. And where are their feet in all of this? They've taken off their sandals. They're sitting there and they're disgusting, dirty, stinky, feces-infested feet under their toenails, which probably have never been cut, are sitting there inches away from this table. None of them got up to clean those feet. Even though everyone knew it had to happen, they couldn't eat a meal easily with the disgusting feet sitting everywhere. Who here likes feet? Anyone got a foot fetish? They're not the most liked part of the human body across the place. But Jesus does something that was so unexpected for these guys. He quietly got up while they were talking and started washing their feet. The God of the universe acting as their servant. And what blows my mind every time I think about it, he had just told them that one of them was going to what? Betray him. One of them was about to walk out and sell Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And Jesus washed Judas's feet. Knowing what Judas was about to do to him, he still washed his feet. He gets to Peter, and what does Peter say? No way are you washing my disgusting feet. No, not you. You are Lord. You're the Messiah. You're not touching my feet. Jesus says, Pete, if I don't wash your feet, you can't be mine. And in typical Peter fashion, this hot-headed, temperamental guy who we love so much, he turns around and goes, well, in which case, take me all. Wash me from head to toe. If that's what it's going to take to make me be with you, wash all of me. The humility that Jesus showed, getting down on that ground and washing those men's feet. To wash Judas's feet is just astounding to me, given the context and what it actually meant at the time. That is the kind of loving God, Jesus, that we serve. And he said to them, go and do this to each other, even once I'm gone. This week, and this is my last thought for the day, this week I have a barrister. I'm friends with him, as is Nicole Morgan, for some of those who are related to Nicole. We have a friend whose name is Matthew. And I spoke to him this morning and made sure it was okay for me to tell this story. But through the week, he was telling us of a story. Matthew Hickey, interesting guy, one of my favorite clients. He was originally one of the 10 Tenors. Anyone heard of the 10 Tenors, the singing group? So he's one of the originals. He's now a barrister. I must say I do have a few thoughts in my head as to how you go from being a singer to a barrister, but he's just one of the nicest guys. And he was in Southport Court this week, and you may have heard about the case. Dreamworld was a case that was on this week, and the inquest into what actually happened there a few years back. And Matthew's one of the barristers working on the case. And he's sitting there outside of court this week, prepping his notes, ready to go back in and give a statement or to help the other barristers in there. And he overhears a young man. And he said in his own words, a young man who looked like he was about to go into court and defend himself. This young man was obviously stressed. He was not handling things too well at the moment. And this young man goes to an older gentleman near Matthew and says, "Sir, can you possibly help me do my tie? I'm about to go into court. Can you help me? I want to wear a tie. I want to respect the court. Please help me." And the older guy, before refusing to help him, said, "Why can't you do your own tie, mate?" And this young guy turns around to this older gentleman and said, "I've never had a dad. No one's ever taught me." Matthew was sitting there, and the emotion that you can get from that simple comment. So Matthew went over, and Matthew, out of interest, is known for his bow ties. Wears them all the time as well. Loves ties, loves bow ties. Couldn't have gotten a better person in that spot at that point of time. He probably did a triple Windsor, double loop, this, that. It would have been fit for a king. And he said, "I'll help you do your tie." And Matt, I didn't get to hear the rest of the story. It wouldn't have even surprised me if Matt went into that courtroom with him. And the judge looks down at this misdemeanor case of this young guy who couldn't afford a Snickers bar, and to see a $600 an hour barrister standing beside him about to defend him. That there is Christianity at work, and Matthew is not a Christian. It is helping those around us, and it's what Jesus showed in every single story you can think of about him. Jesus was the loving outlaw. He broke every rule he had to save humans. And he loved like there was no tomorrow. He was a man who stopped at nothing to love us, including dying on that cross. When you think of all the things that he endured, the question was asked, why are we Christians? He is the reason we're here today.